Greetings and welcome, especially to the youth of the world, wheresoever they are. In this video, we examine very briefly the portrayal of Herod the Great, Herod the king of the Jews, the political king of the Jews, in the Gospels, and the contrast the Gospels develop between Herod the king and Jesus the king, erroneously described as the king of the Jews, which he was not. He was the king of human hearts, as Napoleon said. Napoleon said, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne, and myself, we created our empires, but their days were numbered. But the empire of Jesus Christ will never end because it's the empire of love and compassion. I think that's a good way of putting it, right? So, there is a contrast between Herod the king and Jesus the king. Jesus the king, to give you an indication right at the outset itself, is very rare in history, is unmatched in history because he's the only king in history who came to make everyone else kings. That's why he washed the feet of his disciples. That's why Peter, intuiting the significance of the amazing ministry of Jesus Christ, says that we have now become a holy nation and a royal priesthood. That's Jesus the King. That's the kingdom he came to announce. But the focus in this video, focus for the time being, is not so much Jesus as Herod the Great. Now, Herod acts typically. The wise men of the East commits the big blunder, as wise men alone can do, of going to Herod's palace in search of the babe that was born. Because as per the wisdom available to them, one who is born to be the king of the Jews will be born only in a palace. That's the idea of hereditary succession. Only the king's son can be the next king, or the king's daughter the next queen. So, one who is born to be the king of the Jews must be born in the palace in Jerusalem. So, the wise man from the east was being wise in going to the palace of King Herod, the fatal wisdom which cost the life of 2,000 male children. The massacre of the innocents, as that episode is known in the Gospels. Now, when we think of Herod, some symbols come to our mind. One is a symbol of the sword. He caused 2,000 male children below the age of 5 to be put to the sword. Sword. I'm sure all of us agree that a king is incomplete without his sword. You examine the kings before the invent of the gunpowder and see if there is any portrait of a king from which the sword is absent. So that is something we associate with Herod. The second is the crown. Crown. The king must have his crown. Sometimes we talk of uncrowned kings. Kings who do not need crowns. They need not be born in royal families. They are crowns because of their merit. But that's another category which does not concern us as far as the present line of thinking is concerned in this video, for purposes of this video. So the king has his sword. A king is incomplete without a sword. The king has his crown. there's a direct connection between the king's sword and the king's crown, because if the king does not have his sword and the sword is not effective enough, his crown will go. And with this crown, his head also will go. And that's the beautiful thing about, if you like, or the strange thing about kingship. So don't be in a hurry to become kings. But there is a third thing we associate with King Herod, and that's what I want us to pay particular attention to. There's a third aspect, a third symbol of kingship, so ably, so beautifully and so powerfully portrayed about King Herod. And that third element is called fraud. Fraud. Evidence? Well, let me give you the evidence. When the three wise men come to his palace and ask King Herod, where is the babe that's born to be the king of the Jews? He calls together his wise men, his consultants, if you like to use a modern term. And they also, in the light of the scriptures of the past, or the prophecies of the past, they agree with the idea brought by the wise men. And at the same time, they're not able to locate, they didn't have the GPS system in those days, the special GPS system to locate the holy babe. But instead, the wise men had the benefit of the counterpart then of a, if you like, a satellite, a guiding satellite, a star that went ahead of them, ultimately leading them towards the babe in Bethlehem. So, Herod tells the three wise men, now you go and find out where the baby is, then come back and tell me so that I may go and offer my worship. And clearly it was fraud. Herod's intention was not to worship the babe, but to kill the babe. That's called fraud, downright fraud. So the biblical evidence tells us that that's sufficient evidence as to what the essential ingredients of worldly power is, worldly governance is. Wherever there is governance, whether it is kingship, whether it is democracy, whether it is oligarchy, whether it is anything else, these three things will be there. There will be force, there will be fraud, there will be authority. Sword symbolizes force, the crown symbolizes authority, and fraud, the like of which King Herod wanted to do, but God frustrates his fraud, unfortunately, in all worldly contexts. Such divine interventions do not always frustrate the fraudulent intentions of the rulers of the world. It is because fraud rules the world that Satan claims that the nations of the world are under his sway. The third temptation that Jesus had to face, Satan leads him to the top of a mountain, shows him the nations of the world and their glory, and tells him, if you just fall down and worship him for just a little while, I'll give you all of this. So Satan has this claim. Why? Because the nations of the world are governed by fraud, downright fraud. Power is inseparable from fraud. And this reality, this historical truth, which was concealed for a long time, but barely concealed, as all of us know, with any sense of history, we know that was only very poorly and barely concealed. But this attempt to conceal it is now discarded completely, and we proudly say that we are now practicing post-truth politics, where fraud is assumed to be and accepted as a legitimate part of the strategy of governance or the approach to governance. So that's our achievement as of now. We are proud inheritors of the politics of fraud. But the strange thing is that on the one hand we endorse this politics of fraud or post-truth politics, and on the other hand we expect good governance. I don't know how there can be the two can be harmonized. For the life of me, I've thought about it, but months and months of thinking has not enabled me to resolve this dilemma or unpack this riddle, decode this riddle. how do we expect good governance after instituting fraudulence as the prime element in the dynamics of governance? I don't understand this at all. So, you can develop a very sound political sense if you read the Bible discerningly. Unfortunately, that's not how it is read, how it's interpreted. I'm sure none of the preachers who has dealt with this topic, this text, has said to you what I've shared through this video. And what I'm saying is very basic, nothing complicated, nothing far-fetched, nothing outlandish, just basic home truths. These are the three. You want to understand the phenomenon of political power? Three simple things keep in mind, and you are there. What are the three things? Sword, there will always be force. Second, there is fraud. Force, fraud, then authority. Everything is resolved at the level of authority. You can't question that authority. If you question that authority, you get into serious trouble. So that is how the government, the secular government of the world is organized. The political authority is instituted and institutionalized, and thereafter citizens pay the price for it. Realizing all of this, Sigmund Freud, who is considered the father of modern psychology, said, "We create the state to oppress us." It's very simple words, you can remember. We create the state to oppress us. Difficult words to say smoothly, especially for me. Let's say that again. We create the state to oppress us. You try to say that sentence in a fast, fluid manner, you'll get stuck. Even if you are very, very voluble, even if you have an oily tongue, you'll get stuck. Because that's a harsh reality. That's what is called the onomatopoeic quality of a language. The way the sound sort of rolls out gives you an idea of the theme involved. Onomatopoeic quality of pardon me, my phone is getting discharged. So I've reconnected, I'm trying to charge it. So that's it. So as young people, you need to make sense of the realities all around you. And my being in the Indian context, being directly exposed to whatever is happening, and the element and the large part, the decisive part that fraud plays in the entire dynamics of politics in India at the moment in diverse ways. I don't want to go into detailing all of them because it's not a safe thing to do. It can attract very, very serious reprisals. So fraud, force, and authority. Don't question these things, right? That's how things work, and that's from no textbook on political science or political philosophy. It's from the gospel. It is portrayed so beautifully, so simply, and you can remember it without any great difficulty. So I thought I would offer this biblical insight into understanding the nature and dynamics of power when it is institutionalized as the state. Three aspects. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best.